And our next speaker is Ian Fitzpatrick, who's from Eastbourne Borough Council, who will tell you what we're doing from a council's point of view.
Morning, everyone. So I know quite a few of the faces in the audience today, but Ian Fitzpatrick, so I'm Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Planning and Regeneration at Eastbourne and Lewes councils. And I'm going to talk a little bit about today some work we've been doing on decarbonising our housing stock, our social housing stock. So one of the first things I will talk about is the fact that Eastbourne and Lewes, who I work both with, have got about just under 8,000 council homes. So we actually manage our council homes, so we're a retained stock holding authority. And across the East and West Sussex and Brighton and Hove, there's 7 other councils that have stock retained, so they have their own council homes. So that hasn't gone off to housing associations or any of those. So those 7 authorities have just under 40,000 homes. Now, I've had the pleasure of actually working in about 3 or 4 of those councils. I've worked over in West Sussex, Brighton and Hove, Eastbourne and now Lewes. And my background's housing, so I know that quite a lot of the housing was built at the same time, and it was built, it's very similar. There's similar archetypes. So about a year ago, we set off and said, what can we learn, given the fact that there is commonality across our housing stock? If I can have the next slide, please. So what we did is we pulled the capital programmes for those 7 authorities, and we actually worked out we're spending almost 100 million a year between 7 councils, so 7 decision makers. We're spending 100 million a year on repairs and maintenance. So that isn't about sustainability, that's boiler repair programmes, that's roofs, that's fences, there's a whole gambit of repairs and maintenance. And actually at the time I did the 10-year calculation and said, well, 2030, we'll spend £1 billion between that period. So what can we do as 7 decision-making authorities to actually make a difference using that massive, massive spend? Obviously, there are another 23,000 housing association homes in East and West Sussex and Brighton and Hove, but we focused purely on the council ones because we wanted to maintain that control of decision-making. Next slide, please. So what we did is we actually got a group of experts, and we approached, and Eastbourne and Lewes led this piece of work, we approached Brighton University, and we said, how can we wrap the academics around our asset management teams? So, we know what we know, our asset teams know what they do, but can we apply some academia and research? And through Brighton University, we gathered all of these experts, and some of you will recognise some of the names, as being some of the leading lights in this world at the moment. So we picked on Elementa, Parity, Vor, Absola, Clear Futures, Gleeds, and we got them to say, right, look at our stock, what can you do? What could we do collectively differently? Thanks. And we looked at things like, what are the things, interventions we could do? So minimum, so lighting, LED lighting, window replacement, doors. If we went a little bit further, what could we do in terms of solar PV, heat retention, insulation, those sorts of things, and then the deep elements as well. So we looked at all of those, and we analysed our stock, and actually we proved the concept that there was commonality and around about 8 to 10 different archetypes that are very similar. So we applied those interventions under the gaze of those experts to say what happens around cost, how much does these things cost, but equally what do they do to tenant bills, fuel bills? What do they do to lifetime carbon? So those 3 metrics we really focused on: cost to landlord in this case, tenant impact, so bills, and as I say, carbon embodiment and carbon cost for the whole 30 years. So we've done that piece of work. Next, please. And what we found out is actually there are real benefits to looking at a programme of work across our sector, so those 40-odd thousand homes. And we know that what you do to those properties makes a big difference. So you can tailor the programmes, the interventions that you do, that minimum, medium and deep, you can tailor that to get different things. So if you're wanting to make a real bit difference in the short term to tenant bills, for instance, you do a different set of those interventions. If you want to look at carbon reduction, you do a different set. But equally, each of those different sets has a different cost and a different output. But we're now able to look at those interventions across our stock and scale up and look at how that would make a difference and give policymakers the chance to actually understand some of the decisions and investments they make and how that can have different outcomes. Next, please. A picture of me about 10 years ago here, when we first started Eastbourne's solar PV programme. And some of you, again, in the audience will remember the pain that we went through to get this up and running. But actually, it's been one of the most brilliant, successful programmes I think Eastbourne could ever have undertaken. The benefits to that, obviously that was funded through fit tariff, so the council got fit tariff from the government, but the tenants got effectively the use of the solar PV, the power. So that was a really successful scheme. It's not the same anymore. You can't apply that same principle because, how does the money work? Ollie mentioned actually the money and how that works and how you actually unlock that supply and investment piece is probably the most difficult thing that we can do, but probably the most important. Next one. So Absol, when they looked at our stock, so going back to that research piece with Brighton University and Chester University, actually we looked at our council housing stock. I mean, actually, we know we've done about 600 homes. On the research that we've looked at, we could do another 1,800, and that would make a significant difference. We know there's a real potential for solar PV across our stock. We also know that using our own money, and actually, rather than just potentially replacing we've got £8,000 per home built into our plan for boiler replacement. How can we use that money smarter to twist it towards these sorts of interventions? So that's the work we're trying to look at. And we're also talking to government and BEIS and sharing this because we think that there's a brutal pragmatism here. We can't just ask for money from government. We've got to be able to say we'll use our money, that 100 million that I talked about, smarter. We'll use it in a way that we know the outcomes before we even start because we've done the research, we know what our stock looks like. And then we're looking at potentially giving government the opportunity to invest a little bit extra to get different outcomes. So this is all about looking at the programme and looking at how we can work that. The other big thing on this is that social housing, I think, can act as a catalyst for the private sector. I go back to that 7 councils controlling that big spend. Actually, if we can provide certainty to businesses that there will be a longer term programme, so not a year's programme, but perhaps a 3 to 5 year programme, and we can give certainty to those businesses that are involved in potentially gearing up to these sorts of challenges, that will give them the certainty to invest and actually invest in their kit, in their training, in skills. And that could give Eastbourne and Lewes particularly an advantage for the future. So it's an economic benefit as well to this. So next slide, please. On that skills agenda and the investment piece, we mentioned earlier that there'd been Eastbourne Borough Council with Ohm Energy and East Sussex College Group have just opened up our first decarbonising academy. Now that's about actually driven by, interestingly, conversations that we were having when we were doing this piece of work with a local SME, saying that their biggest risk is they won't be able to meet the demand they've got because they haven't got enough trained staff. So the college and the council, that's a council building, that's one of our buildings on Hampden Park Retail, that's now in place, that's now there on to take new students going forward in the next year. Next slide. Inside that unit, we've got a mock-up property, and I see the pain on some of the Ohm guys there and the college. This is really hard one. This is really difficult to put together, and it's lots of people are talking about this stuff but not doing it. But we've actually got this now, a mock-up property. It's got solar PV on the roof. It's got the right type of kit within there, so students can actually learn and practice alongside the engineers that are actively working in the sector at the moment, and alongside the college tutors. So that's a really different council, college, private sector initiative. Next slide, please. So really my big ask of anyone that will listen really is that I think the councils spend a lot of money. We are able to put together programmes because there are 7 clients in East Sussex, for instance, and West Sussex, whereas the private sector's got 1 million different buyers. We can actually look at reducing cost of living, we can act as a catalyst for new jobs. We can look at that improvement of health, because you put cheap heat into properties, that helps remove that scientific condensation mould issue. And I think that we can act as a catalyst to really give certainty to businesses to kick-start this type of activity, because it won't happen by accident. You know, businesses need that certainty. That's it. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing, thank you.